The American Civil War was one of the most violent and defining events in U.S. history, a conflict that claimed more American lives than any other war before it. But wars never erupt overnight. For decades, the United States was slowly tearing in two. The North was racing toward the future with factories, booming cities, and railroads, while the South depended almost entirely on cotton, an empire built on the labor of 4 million enslaved people. Every time America expanded west, the same explosive question returned: would the new territory be a free state or a slave state? Whoever controlled more states controlled Congress, policy, and ultimately the future of the country. Presidents tried temporary fixes like the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850, but these were nothing more than band-aids on a sinking ship. By the time the election of 1860 arrived, the pressure finally blew apart. And into this moment stepped Abraham Lincoln, a man who rose from a one-room log cabin in Kentucky to the highest office in the land. He wasn't wealthy, privileged, or polished. He had less than a year of formal schooling, grew up working with his hands, and taught himself law by candlelight after long days of chopping wood. People called him Honest Abe, the lawyer who once walked miles just to return 6 cents of change to a customer. But what made Lincoln dangerous to the South was simple: he opposed the expansion of slavery. When he won the presidency without a single Southern state, Southern leaders saw it as the end of their political power. South Carolina seceded first, followed quickly by Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. Together, they formed the Confederate States of America. But Lincoln didn't begin with violence. The first crisis came at Fort Sumter, a Union fort sitting inside Confederate territory. Lincoln faced an impossible choice: send reinforcements and look like an aggressor, or abandon the fort and look weak. He chose a middle path: send only food and supplies. But the Confederates refused to allow any presence of Union authority. On April 12, 1861, Confederate cannons opened fire for 34 straight hours. Miraculously, no one died, but the message was loud and clear: the Civil War had begun. Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion, a move that caused 4 more states, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina, to secede. Virginia was the real blow, because it brought along one of the greatest military minds in American history, Robert E. Lee. Ironically, Lee opposed secession and even called slavery a moral and political evil, but he refused to fight against his home state. Both sides believed the war would end quickly. Civilians even packed picnic baskets to watch the first major battle at Bull Run, expecting a quick Northern victory. Instead, the Confederate line held strong, thanks to General Thomas Stonewall Jackson, who earned his legendary nickname that day. The Union Army collapsed into a chaotic retreat, and the harsh reality of a long, bloody war began to settle in. Meanwhile, in the Western Theater, a cigar-chewing general named Ulysses S. Grant captured Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, demanding unconditional surrender and proving he was there to win, not negotiate. But at Shiloh, Grant's army was nearly crushed by a surprise Confederate attack. He held firm, counterattacked at dawn, and forced a Confederate retreat, but at the cost of more than 23,000 casualties, more than all previous American wars combined. Lincoln desperately needed a strong Eastern commander, so he turned to George McClellan, a brilliant organizer who saw himself as Napoleon reborn. His flaw? He refused to attack unless conditions were perfect. Lincoln grew frustrated, even writing to him, "If you don't want to use the army, I would like to borrow it for a while." McClellan eventually launched the Peninsula Campaign to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond, getting close enough to hear church bells. But Robert E. Lee took command, launched aggressive attacks, and pushed McClellan back. Though Lee's losses were higher, he shattered McClellan's confidence. Emboldened, Lee attempted an invasion of the North. Then fate intervened. Union soldiers accidentally discovered a copy of Lee's battle plans left behind at an abandoned campsite. With this incredible advantage, McClellan confronted Lee at Antietam, resulting in the bloodiest single day in American history. Cornfields turned into death traps, the bloody lane filled with bodies, and Antietam Creek became a desperate struggle for survival. More than 23,000 casualties littered the fields by nightfall. The battle was a tactical draw but a strategic Union victory, forcing Lee back into Virginia. Lincoln seized the moment and issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that enslaved people in Confederate states shall be forever free. It didn't instantly free everyone, but it transformed the war's purpose, allowed nearly 200,000 black men to enlist, and ensured that Britain and France would not support the Confederacy. In 1863, Lee launched another invasion of the North, this time into Pennsylvania. Just 3 days before the coming battle, Lincoln replaced his commander with George Meade. Their armies collided at a small town called Gettysburg. The 3-day battle was a storm of chaos, devastating fighting in wheat fields, rocky hills, and dense woods. At Little Round Top, Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine made a desperate bayonet charge after running out of ammunition, saving the Union line. On the 3rd day, Lee ordered the infamous Pickett's Charge, sending 12,000 men across open fields into a wall of Union fire. The attack failed disastrously. Of the thousands who began the march, less than half returned uninjured. Lee took the blame, whispering, "It is all my fault." Gettysburg became the turning point of the war, with 50,000 casualties. Meanwhile, in the West, Ulysses S. Grant laid siege to Vicksburg, the last Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River. In a daring nighttime operation, Grant sent his gunboats past enemy cannons under the cover of darkness. The plan worked, and he tightened his grip. Inside Vicksburg, Confederate troops were reduced to eating mules, dogs, and rats. On July 4, 1863, the same week as Gettysburg, Vicksburg surrendered. With victories east and west, Lincoln finally had his winning general. He promoted Grant to command all Union armies. Grant launched a relentless campaign against Lee in Virginia, fighting horrific battles in the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Cold Harbor. Losses were staggering, and newspapers called Grant a butcher. But Lincoln recognized Grant's strategy. Lee could not replace his men, the Union could. Grant pushed forward no matter the cost. For 9 brutal months, he besieged Petersburg, slowly starving Lee's army. At the same time, in the West, General William Tecumseh Sherman captured Atlanta and then launched his devastating march to the sea, burning railroads, destroying supplies, and breaking the Confederacy's will to fight. "War is cruelty," Sherman said. "The crueler it is, the sooner it will be over." By early 1865, the Confederacy was collapsing. Petersburg fell. Richmond evacuated and burned. Lee fled west with starving troops but was surrounded at Appomattox. On April 9, 1865, Lee met Grant in a small Virginia courthouse. Grant arrived muddy and exhausted. Lee arrived in full dress uniform, dignified even in defeat. Grant offered generous terms. Confederate soldiers could go home, officers could keep their sidearms, and no one would be punished. When Lee asked for food for his starving men, Grant immediately sent 25,000 rations. The war was over. But the nation's relief was shattered just 5 days later. On April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater. After guiding the nation through its darkest hours, after preserving the Union and opening the door to end slavery, Lincoln died before he could witness America's rebirth. The Civil War killed over 600,000 Americans and left deep scars, but from its ashes, the United States was given a second chance to live up to its founding ideals, that all men are created equal. It remains the conflict that most profoundly shaped the nation we know today.